Australia keeps saying it wants a future made in Australia, but that future is built in labs, research institutes and university partnerships years before it shows up as jobs and exports. Starving that pipeline while talking up innovation is policy hypocrisy. At some point, we have to stop treating research funding as a discretionary spend and start recognising it as core infrastructure, as fundamental as roads, ports and the electricity grid. If we keep running the innovation engine on fumes, we shouldn't be surprised when other nations overtake us on productivity, technology and talent.
G'day and welcome to Global Horizons. I'm your host, Rob Malicki, coming to you from Garigal Land in Sydney.
And I'm Dirk Mulder, CEO and founder of the Koala News. I'm coming to you from Dirk country in the west of Sydney.
It's that time of year, Dirk. We're on the run down to Christmas. I bet you, if you're feeling like me, mate, just bring it on. What a year.
Yeah, mate, full on. Yeah, we're recording. Today's the 25th, which is a Tuesday. And yeah, not long to go at all. Literally the 25th, exactly a month to go.
And what's quite funny is, like, I finished my last domestic trip for the year last Friday. Like, I was in Perth all last week, flew home, and I just was like, oh, it's almost summer for me now. But phew, my friend. Unfortunately, the politicians aren't letting you off the hook and giving you an early summer break.
No,
it's all happening,
not
isn't
just
it?
The politicians, Rob. I'm actually off to India on Thursday for 4 days. So I, luckily enough, have been invited by Ravi Lokan Singh at Global Reach to speak to his annual, I'm assuming it's like a professional development kind of thing for all his staff in India. Yes. So yeah, they're for 3 nights and then back. And then I think I'll be in the enviable position of you as now starting to turn my direction towards summer and Christmas. And I don't dare I say not starting to relax, but certainly over the hump of travel and those sorts of things.
Yeah, cool. So one last trip coming up. But in the interim, mate, like, we're back in the Senate with the ESOS bill.
Yeah, absolutely. So, mate, it's almost Groundhog Day or Groundhog Year. If we think back to this time last year, we were in exactly the same position. We were trying to get a bill passed before the end of the year, and it went right down to the last sitting days of Parliament. I don't know that it'll do that this time, but as we speak, last night, the Senate committee submitted its report to the Senate on the Education Legislation Amendment Integrity and Other Measures Bill. And again, just a reminder for those listening, this isn't just purely ESOS changes. There's some things in there around TEXA, around childcare. But notably of the ESOS stuff, there's a whole bunch of changes in there, and I dare say that we'll cover that over the next few minutes. But mate, the interesting thing is one recommendation from the committee, and that is that the bill passes as is.
In some ways I'm surprised, and I'm also not surprised. They haven't had a real look at this, have they? Let's be honest.
Mate, this is the difficult thing, isn't it? It's certainly, I think like we said in the last podcast, they're tying it to the childcare measures is politically astute on behalf of the government. It's really interesting. I don't want to sound like a broken record, but I keep coming back to this kind of idea that integrity is a major issue in our system. And we go back, and actually, I don't mind saying one of the slides that I've put up for this thing in India next week is policy development, right? There's a what, there's a how, and a why. And generally, when you develop policy, there's a policy issue statement or there's a problem to solve. And so if we reverse engineer that, what's happening? Well, obviously, there's going to be less students in the system. There's a whole bunch of things around the what, and that's pretty clear. The how, the mechanism, that's pretty clear too. We've seen a bill, we've seen a whole bunch of things change, allocations to universities, all those mechanisms. The bit that escapes me is the why. And again, I go back over the last 24 months. Claire O'Neill, way back in the day, was talking about international students and the housing crisis. And that was the rationale for the driving of this change of policy and the what and the how. We're now at a point where it seems like integrity is the main driver for this bill. And again, I go back and, I do it not to discount what Assistant Minister Hill's been saying around the place. There obviously are things that we can correct. But what concerns me the most is that some of this stuff is being massively overplayed, and it really hurts.
Ain't that the truth? The why is, I think it's just called politics, let's face it. It's like an easy argument to have. And no one's arguing, I think, in the sector that there aren't, as you've just said, that there aren't some issues that need to be resolved. But do you need a sledgehammer or do you need a scalpel? I think we all know what the answer is. answer is to that. Should we jump into some of the things that, like, there were some concerns that came out in the submissions. So once again, very tight window open for submissions. 44 submissions were submitted by last Friday, and yet already we've got a report out essentially recommending this thing being passed. So some of the concerns, I'll let you talk through those, mate. Like some of the main concerns that sort of came out in those submissions, and then what the committee said about them.
Yeah, certainly. So look,
sorry, just stop. Mate, just the sigh says it all. You're just like, oh, here we go.
Yeah, and mate, I'm sorry if that sounds a bit defeatist. No, mate, it's the same kind of thing. Look,
it goes back to last July, right? Like the committee meetings from last July. It's just really, we're still here. Anyway, over to you, mate.
Yeah, look, probably the number one concern that's been raised by the sector is about ministerial oversight and the extension of ministerial powers, where the minister can essentially not only just cancel courses, but cancel classes of courses, and that just those ministerial powers are just too far, too wide, and too deep without oversight, essentially. There is some wording in the Act, in the bill, that talks about the minister collaborating or seeking guidance from, but by and large, the minister can essentially wave the wand now and do what the minister wants. And I think that's dangerous. That's, and I'm not the only one in that sort of court. Andrew Norton, as we spoke about on the last podcast, made that point probably a lot better than what I ever could. But that's a major one. The one around definition of education agent. And this is really interesting. So actually in the report, and look, the shout out to Tracy Harris. Tracy's been following this subject really closely and has been keeping the entire sector up to date really well. But so Tracy's line in her latest piece is, and it's around the definition of education agent. Although it was acknowledged concerns that the definition of education agent was too broad, the committee concluded that robust action on integrity was essential and expected that policy guidance would clarify the scope. So I guess that sets the tenure for, again, robust action on integrity. Again, I have a real issue with that kind of nomenclature and the way that's pitched. And it sounds like we are running a dirty laundry shop here and that robust action is required. I don't see that. I'm not a proponent of that. Like I said, there's definitely things that we can do better, but the way that this is being pitched is that this needs cleaning up yesterday. And I just don't see that. So education agent is a big one. Education commissions, there's a whole sway of things around education commissions. It'll be interesting to see where that lands. And again, there needs to be probably some sort of increased transparency around commissions. Obviously, onshore commissions is a big issue. But again, the way that the bill pitches it, it's almost like where the pharmaceutical industry 20 years ago, where groups of people are being taken to, if we're in North America, being taken to Mexico and shown a good time for a couple of weeks and then just expected to sell product. And I don't think when we talk about agent inbounds, we want to make sure that agent inbounds are not disliked, but the whole point of an agent inbound and the whole premise, the bullseye of it is to ensure that agents return and
know what they're talking about.
They know what they're talking about. They've had first-hand experience of campuses, of facilities. They interact with academics. And so when we pitch that kind of a thing into the realm of this is an agent commission or a bonus again, the ramifications, whether they be unintended, and there's this whole unintended thing, I think we need to pause and get this stuff right before we start rolling it out. Because, again, we're in a global sector. There is, again, in my opinion, people aren't going out to be corrupt in these areas, but we need to make sure that we're not, I don't know what the word is, killing the goose or whatever it might be, that we're not actually just creating a landscape where we aren't able to actually operate. And that's the real difficult thing. Yeah, look, I mean, the bill now will go to the Senate floor. I believe it's on a hearing list. It should be heard in the next couple of days and voted on. It'll be interesting to see what the discussions are. Certainly the Greens put some comments around that. They spoke a little bit about, recommending an amendment to remove the additional ministerial powers on applications, registrations and courses. So again, from what we just said, that seems very sensible. And the Greens argued that this power provides the minister unbridled liberty to control registrations in the higher education sector without procedural scrutiny. So again, that's probably an area that the Greens will talk to when it hits the floor. Let's hope that some sanity prevails and that there is some oversight or some procedural scrutiny, as they refer to it, in that space. But yeah, look, mate, it's going to be a different world next year. There's no doubt about it. And I think, as most people have probably said, and even from the submissions, I think it was 250 odd or so this time last year, we're now down to 44. Perhaps the sector's had got a little bit of fatigue around this, and this might just be a carte blanche kind of thing that gets through.
Yeah. I think sector's fatigued because at this stage we're looking at it saying it doesn't really matter what you put in a submission when they're having submissions closed on a Friday and they're trying to rush this through within the next week. It's almost what's the point? Because anything that you put forward is essentially just providing them the ammunition to say, yeah, you're saying this, but actually we've already decided that and this is why. So I don't know. I can understand why so fewer people have decided to put in. My point of worry around that is you mentioned that a lot of this stuff would be clarified by policy guidance, education agent definitions and things like that. My concern around that is if you have a minister with unbridled power, the policy guidance is supposed to come from the bureaucracy, from the public servants, but the public service serves the minister. They're there to serve the minister of the day. So it's this like loop that just supports itself rather than necessarily supporting what's in the interests of the sector. And most importantly, what's in the interest of students. It's just as you were talking about this, I was just thinking, imagine if Peter Dutton had been elected, and this isn't a political statement, by the way. Imagine if he'd been elected off the basis of all of that kind of anti-immigration sentiment that was coming out during the last election campaign. And then his minister had unbridled power to just go and chop off the back of that. I don't know, to me, that lack of procedural fairness is absolutely the critical element in this.
Well, I hate to, this sounds really hard. I can't believe I'm actually saying this, but it's a central tenet of a thriving democracy is having that. So it certainly points to the whole point of us being in a managed era now. It's clearly no longer a marketplace. It's being, I guess the term coming from upon high is managed. I've heard the word manipulation within the sector, but there's definitely going to be government in control, management, interference, a lot more now. And the difficult thing, in any, I don't want to say business, but in any organisation, certainty is key. And being able to put your foot forward firmly is central to being able to run any organisation. And so if we've got a minister now that can swap and change at their whims, what does that create for that certainty and that environment that people need to work within to ensure that policy and to ensure that the main tenets of what they're looking at externally or in their operating environment are going to be the same in 3 months as they are now? And so those types of things need to be really, I think, thought out. They need to be really, I was going to use the word conservative, but I don't use the word conservative politically, but they need to be baby steps to ensure that we're not continually swapping and changing things every 3 months, and that a new policy and a new ministerial direction and a new this and a new that just keep going, because the international education sector is, like many say, is like a large ship. To turn it round, it does take time. And again, we're missing, I think, the point that we've got one of the most robust governance processes in the world already, but yet it just doesn't seem to be acknowledged. And this political interference or this political string pulling, I hope benefits, but I find it really difficult to see how at the moment.
Maybe just by way of wrapping this up, scalpel versus sledgehammer, just to set up a bit of a contrast, as of October 2025, there are 30,000 people waiting an initial assessment of their protection visa. There are 48,000 cases in the Administrative Review Tribunal to review applications for protection visas, or judicial reviews. There's over 14,000 that are in judicial reviews. I don't know, like, to me, if we're really trying to solve this thing that's become this political football around migration and too many students, everything, like, I don't know, it kind of looks like there's a bigger issue there that needs solving. Not saying that there aren't legitimate cases in it. Of course, there are like probably thousands and thousands of cases, but it's also pretty clear that there's an abusive process that's been well documented in the mainstream media around protection visas, allowing people to stay longer. I don't know, to me, wouldn't that be a place where you'd spend a bit of attention rather than smacking our industry?
Oh, mate, there's a whole bunch of different areas that I think could be discussed. The concentration appears to be, and I might be unpopular in certain parts of the sector for saying this, but I'm just saying this is an alternative narrative. Everything seems to be about students coming in, and all the data, all the research that I have found or that I can see is there's actually not much impost on students into society comparatively. Okay, so I shouldn't say not much. Of course there is. They're students, they're going to be catching buses, catching trains, eating food, all of those sorts of things. But there's been no discussion about capping graduate visas. So when they actually graduate, what happens? They move out into society and they go and take out rentals and they go and do, but there's been absolutely no discussion about that aspect of it. So I think to your point, there are narratives here that are just completely untouched, that at least are worthy of a discussion. And again, by capping graduate visas, we take some of the incentive, I guess, about coming to Australia. That one of the good things about coming to Australia is that you do have access to a graduate visa and you can work for a period of time afterwards. But it seems like we've just narrowed in on students coming here first year.
Yeah.
That's the
feeds the rhetoric. It feeds the political rhetoric, doesn't it?
Yeah, we just, I don't think we've had an informed, intelligent conversation about the whole system rather than just narrowing in on students because, and again, I can only assume because it's an easy hit, it plays well and we don't have to worry about anything else. We talk about students as temporary migrants. I've said this a number of times. If you look at the pools of people coming here as temporary migrants, New Zealanders on the treaty that we have with New Zealand is a massive cohort. There's been no discussion about that. And again, it's not to say that we should cap or cut that, but it's worthy of a discussion when we talk about working visas and the amount that the government has expanded working holiday visas for all sorts of countries. They're tacked on to trade agreements. Is that worthy of a discussion when we talk about migration? That it just all seems to be pointed at incoming students at the front end. And again, to your point, is that the right discussion to be having? It's what we've certainly been saying for a couple of years now. I mean, the government persists and pursues. It is what it is.
Is what it is.
Mate, I was going to say, no, just keep rolling because I'm going to do this. I'm going to do a you.
I'm going to let you keep rolling. And you know what? For those people, we're not even going to edit that out. Len, so for those people listening along, Len is our faithful video and audio editor. So I'm just going to say, Len, leave this in. That way people can hear how Dirk and I roll when it comes to the podcast.
I was just going to try and make the link to say that whole discussion leads really well into the sector social license. So with the government constantly targeting students, and then that frays into universities, VC pay, this, that, university making surpluses. And you, my friend, released I thought, a really on-point video during the week that speaks to that. You want to tell us about it?
Yeah, thanks, man. Yeah, look, I just read another one of these articles in the paper, just as you're saying, where it's talking about social license and focusing in on, once again, what I think are some of the wrong issues. And it was talking about University of Sydney recording a $500 million surplus. Now, and to be very clear, that the article was accurately calling it a surplus, not profit. But at the same time was citing the fact that there was an internal report saying that there could potentially be job cuts. So I remember in this article and just thinking, it's another one of these cases where it makes a good headline. Uni makes, and this is my word, uni makes profit, cuts staff. And it just pissed me off, I'll be honest. Just pissed me off. Because in the end, universities exist to service the community. So I did some digging. I went to look at what the foundation documents for the University of Sydney actually say. And it says, essentially, that I'm paraphrasing, but the university exists to serve the community. And so when we talk about profit or surpluses for institutions, that's money that's going back into the system to support what universities do for the community. Education, research, innovation, lifting our standards of living. So I just kind of got irritated and did a video on it.
And like I said, it was great. And if I can give you a compliment, from when we started doing this 2 years ago, I've got to tell you, your post-editing skills, if I can put it that way, and some of the little video knickknacks that you can put in now, mate, it looked really good. And I think the message was really clear. Obviously got quite a bit of traction on social media. I think most people in support, certainly were a few that made some points. And I think the interesting thing is your point about the surpluses going back in the system, to me, I saw as very high level. I think some people out there, and I don't want to use the word confused because that's probably not right, but immediately run to how do universities spend their money then?
Yeah.
And I think those two issues are very separate. And I think that's a separate conversation to have. If universities aren't spending their money well or aren't spending it in the way that the community, and as per your legislation, if they're putting $200 million into a research centre, they need to be able to justify that. There is perceptions around cutting service on campus, those types of things. But I think that's a separate issue to the fact that they're merely making a surplus. And what happens to that surplus is very different to what happens in the private sector, where it's a dividend or it goes into remuneration bonuses or those types of things, whereas it does go back into the system. Now then, from what happens from that point and how they spend it, again, that's a different conversation.
Oh, I completely agree. And so, firstly, shout out to Len, who will see this video too, because she edits it. That kind of technical wizardry is mostly her. But as a team, we now know how to work together. So I know what footage to give her so that she can then overlay that with all of the kind of magical stuff. So that's been a fun journey. But yeah, like just talking to your point, to me, it's such an easy mental heuristic, a psychological heuristic. And for those people, it's basically a shortcut that we go, oh, vice-chancellors' salaries are too high, and therefore that's linked to unis making profit, inverted commas. These things are not necessarily linked. And I'm definitely not saying that I'm for or against VCs getting paid what they're paid. Legitimate debate, as you say. But it's got nothing to do with the fact that if an institution is well run, records a surplus, then it has more in its arsenal to do more for us. The end.
No, mate, 100%. And again, this is where we talk about it. And this is where we talk about financial models in institutions. And the one thing that I don't think the community understands is that indexation against CGS loading is appalling. And over the long period, universities end up losing money on Australian domestic students because of how they're funded in that space. And that's why universities for probably the last 10 to 15 years have looked for alternate funding streams. And we're seeing that now. Obviously, international students is a large chunk of that, but we're seeing now more and more done almost like in the American space, where we're looking at benefactors, doning, and universities are really now starting to look at alternative income streams, which possibly, if you think back in the day, they're only supporting domestic students. Indexation was better. They could run a university on that. Whereas now they probably look more business-like or more commercial, because the number one account isn't necessarily the government account anymore. They've got to start looking at how are they supplementing, how are they diversifying, how are they cross-subsidising all of their income to ensure that they've got the right mix. And when there are unsure policy settings, that's what leads to the questions around cutting staff, because you don't know what your future budget operational plan might be for the next 3 years. Because if the government does decide to cut international students and you're going to be down 20%, that's a large chunk of your budget. So operating within your means, and that's becoming, I think, tighter, is really important for institutions. So it's a difficult space. It's a complex space. And that's where I think it's really difficult for Joe Public out there to understand it. And it's very easy just to tag them as saying universities are making a bucket load of money and they're not reinvesting it.
Yeah. I'll just maybe leave it on this point. Like, government funding is declining. If we are not happy as a society with universities having to make surpluses and do all of this commercial activity, international students and the whole lot, government needs to put more money in. End. That's it. That's the end of it. And as a sector, that's the only argument that I think we need to make is, you're not happy with this? Look at the government. Like, go look over there, because they're the ones that aren't putting in the coin. And maybe that's a good transition point, because talking about governments not putting in enough coin, like CSIRO, job cut, like, what are we doing, man?
Mate, you're absolutely right. So yeah, for those that may not be aware, but I think if you're in the sector, you probably should be. The CSIRO announced a whole bucket load of job cuts, I want to say about a week ago. Universities Australia was pretty quick to come out and state something alike, and I'll run the first line. Australia's scientific community is sounding the alarm, with Universities Australia warning that job cuts at the CSIRO are a stark sign of a research system running dangerously low on fuel. And again, when we talk about that government input, the numbers don't lie. So Australia now invests 1.69% of GDP in research and development. When we think about the OECD average, that's 2.7%. And when we think about leaders in this space, South Korea and Germany, they both invest more than 3% of their GDP. So we are almost half of what the leading countries in this space are doing. And we wonder why we're not leading the world in research and innovation and development.
Yeah, there's no surprises in that, is it? Put the money in the system. And likewise, the unis are doing their job. Their charter is to serve the community. It's to do intensive research, but they got to fund it themselves. Hence, they have to go and be commercial. So
exactly.
This all comes back to the same thing. Like, Public's not happy about it. Go knock on the door of your local member and just tell them that you want the government to put in more money. I really feel that it's our obligation as higher educators, not even international educators, higher educators, to just be saying that over and over. I don't know how many people are employed in Australian higher education, 150,000 or something. It's massive. If we all just kept making that argument, don't look at us, guys. We're doing our job. We're actually doing our job according to the law, the legislation that's put down. Go talk to the government.
Absolutely. Mate, can I, if I can, I'm going to divert slightly. There was one comment on that story on LinkedIn that I thought was just so on point, and it was by a gentleman by the name of Clive Smallman. I think Clive is a senior academic. He held a senior role at Western Sydney University, and you see him pop up commentary-wise here or there in a while. So this is what he said, and again, I'm just quoting verbatim, but I think it's really good. He said, "This is what happens when a country treats science as a cost centre instead of a strategic asset. Cuts at the CSIRO aren't just efficiency measures, they are quiet acts of national self-harm. When your premier public research agency is shrinking its workforce and narrowing its horizon, you're not trimming fat, you're cutting into the capability that underpins everything from climate resilience and biosecurity to advanced manufacturing and digital innovation. Australia keeps saying it wants a future made in Australia, but that future is built in labs, research institutes and university partnerships years before it shows up as jobs and exports. Starving that pipeline while talking up innovation is policy hypocrisy. At some point, we have to stop treating research funding as a discretionary spend and start recognising it as core infrastructure, as fundamental as roads, ports and the electricity grid. If we keep running the innovation engine on fumes, we shouldn't be surprised when other nations overtake us on productivity, technology, and talent." And I think, mate, I just think it just nails it.
You know what, Dirk? I'm just reading this quote. I'm like, I'm literally going to take that verbatim and turn that into our next rant video. So stay tuned for that on LinkedIn. I better reach out to Clive to begin with to ask for permission to use that, because that's just so bang on.
Yeah, no, 100%.
Maybe we can jump down from a national level into state level. A few things going on at state level. Consultations open for Victoria's next international education strategy.
Yeah, so they're refreshing their international education strategy. As you say, consultations are open. I think this is really smart. I don't know. I guess there probably is always a consultation process that sits behind this, but this is pretty front and centre. So it's very open, I would like to use the word transparent. We'll wait and see how the evaluation goes on that. But certainly they're going out to market or going out to the sector and saying, hey, we're going to refresh our plan and we want you to be involved. Consultations close on the 19th of December. So there's a few weeks there, which is nice to not just have it as a week. And the final strategy is expected to be released in the first half of 2026. So they've given themselves a nice little horizon there to get it done. There's two ways that people can participate. So education providers, sector representatives, and industry stakeholders. You can email responses to the discussion paper. And again, if you jump onto the Victorian Study Melbourne website, or if you jump onto the Koala News and have a look at the story, you can access it via that. So there's a discussion paper, and your email responses are very much welcome. And you can email that to info@studymelbourne.vic.gov.au. If you are a current, past, or future international student, so again, I take my hat off to Victoria in inviting actual student participation. You can complete a 10-minute survey online. And again, jump on either to their website or onto the Koala News story, and you can access it from there. But yeah, full marks to the Victorian government. Caroline Hartlett runs a really good show down there. Congratulations to her and the team for what appears to be the start of a very good process.
Yeah, shout out to the team down there. I do admire the work they do. And the Victorian government over many years, I feel, has been one of the stronger state governments when it comes to really genuinely supporting the sector with its initiatives. Yeah, good to see that process underway. And certainly if you're down in Victoria or work in and with Victoria, good chance. And once again, mate, like, this is your opportunity to be involved, to have your voice heard when policy is being made. It doesn't come around that often. It's only every sort of 5 years, 10 years that these sort of things come up, whether it's state level or federal level. And if you don't participate now, I'm sorry, but you've got to accept what comes out. So great opportunity to take 5-10 minutes to get your thoughts in a simple email and send that through to the team that's helping to develop the policy.
100%, mate, 100%.
And maybe by way of wrapping up, you and I, yesterday evening, Dirk, having a nice little glass of wine at Circular Quay, overlooking the magnificent Sydney Harbour, with a whole bunch of international ed friends for the New South Wales International Ed Awards. Yeah, it was a pretty nice night, wasn't it?
I tell you, there's not too many better parts of the world. Just to set the picture, we're up on the 6th floor of the Museum of Contemporary Art, which is right on Circular Quay there. I can't remember what cruise ship it was, but the Carnival something. Yeah, it was pulling out in front of us and did a big U-turn in Sydney Harbour, and the sun was
shining. In front of the Opera House.
Mate, the sails of the Opera House were glistening. Mate, there's not too many better parts of the world when you put all that in context. So yeah, it was made a pretty specky night. The team at Study New South Wales always do a great job at putting those nights on, and full congratulations to all the winners on the night, especially the students, because that's what we're there to celebrate, is student participation, student excellence, student achievement, and there's some wonderful stories that came out of it.
Mate, like, so you were up for an award last night. You're not going to talk about it because you're too humble. But mate, I was disappointed for you not to win that. You're in the award for excellence category. And mate, I just think what you've done with Koala has filled such a gap in the industry. Personally, I was a little bit bummed. Obviously, yeah, fantastic for the winners and everybody's very deserving. But yeah, mate, just on a personal note, I was a bit disappointed not to see you get a gong.
Oh, thanks, mate. Look, I appreciate it. And look, I think you brought it up last podcast, and I'll say the same thing that I said then. I mean, in the category that I was in, the winners were the City of Sydney and the Mayoral Welcome. And like, that's been an iconic event for a very long time now. It's lovely to see that acknowledged. Mate, the We Are Australia Foundation and Adrian DeLuca, they're set up to help students when they're at their most vulnerable and in crisis management. So again, when you think about an organisation that's deserved of an accolade, Adrian and the work that they do down there is, no, I shouldn't say they're national, but he's headquartered in Melbourne. I tip my hat to those guys because they've done really well. And the other one in the category was the University of Newcastle, and they had an initiative up, and the University of Newcastle's had a wonderful student support area for a very long time. You know, it's a stiff competition, and congratulations to the City of Sydney for taking it out, and to my fellow finalists who, you know, the end of the day, we all try and strive to support the sector in different ways, and it's a shame that they didn't get more of an acknowledgement themselves. And I say this, particularly the We Are Australia Foundation. They provide a really good service, and to see them up in lights would have been a really good thing too.
Mate, I thought you were the pick of the categories. I'm just going to say it. Actually, I just want to say this because I've been traveling around a lot over the last 6 weeks, and often people hear the podcast, and so they hear you and me together, and they're like, "Oh, so how's it going to work between you and Dirk?" I'm like, "Okay, so I run the podcast. We do this together, and Dirk is the guy that does the Koala News." So, mate, that's 100% you and Tracy and the other people who make contributions. And once again, I'm calling it on behalf of the entire industry. But for those people watching this on video, Dirk Mulder, I would like
let's
to
hope they're not,
present-
because I'm going to make you turn red.
I'd like to present you with.
No.
I'm just looking for something I can present you with. This masking tape holder is presented to you as the most freaking legendary award in Australian international education for 2025. I present you my tape holder, hoping that this will be helpful to you in 2026 to continue to support us in what we do.
Oh, let's hope
You're like-
people aren't watching YouTube, because I'm red as a beetroot at the moment. And mate, I thank you. I appreciate it. And I say this with much love, but God, you can be a twit sometimes.
And maybe on that note, we should wrap up. I think that's the most accurate thing we've said this entire podcast. So we'll see you in the next news episode. And I reckon that might be just about our last one for the year, Dirk, depending on how things unfold with this Senate hearing.
It possibly could be. We might be able to sneak another one in, but we'll see how things work.
That's all from us. See you next time, Dirk.
Thanks, Rob. See you next time.
If you've enjoyed this episode of the Global Horizons podcast, consider subscribing to our newsletter. Search for Global Horizons podcast and then just pop in your email address, and that way you will never miss out on all the critical international education news that you need to stay up to date with. This episode has been produced on Garigal land in Sydney. Our video and audio editor is Len Zamora, and I'm your host, Rob Malicki. Have an awesome day. See you in the next episode.